We've invited Tema Smith, who's a diversity advocate, writer, and Jewish community builder. She is currently the Director of Professional Development at 18 Doors, which was formerly called Interfaith Family, an organization that empowers people in interfaith relationships to engage in Jewish life and to make Jewish choices, and encourages Jewish communities like ours to welcome them. And I very much see that as an outgrowth of the work that we started as one of the first, if not the first, conservative synagogue in 1992 to create a Kiruv committee to do this work. For her, this comes after 7 years as a synagogue professional, most recently as Director of Community Engagement at Holy Blossom Temple, Toronto's oldest synagogue. She's a contributing columnist at The Forward, and her writing has been published in My Jewish Learning, The Globe, and Mail, and the Canadian Jewish News. She's dedicated to building a meaningful and inclusive Jewish community through research, training, writing, and relational engagement. Over the last 10 years, she has worked to advance the conversation about a racially diverse Judaism, working with organizations like B'chol Lashon, which we've invited to our community before, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, the Miles Nadel JCC, CJP PAC, and conducting trainings and presentations for many Jewish organizations, including our own Boston JCRC, among many others. She's involved in task forces examining the issues on the nexus of Israel and anti-Semitism in America. And before beginning her career in Jewish communal service, she was a graduate student in religion and politics and early Judaism under the supervision of the former Canada Research Chair in Modern Jewish Thought at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, a place where my family is connected to through the Green family. So it's nice to have connections. It was great to spend an hour with her earlier in the week, where we shared many things, including a love of Peterborough and Bobcaygeon, which are little tiny towns. But since I've gone houseboating there 3 times, I actually know those places. So we actually got to speak about that and fun bands, such like the Tragically Hip, and had a nice conversation. I'm very excited to welcome Tema, who's going to speak now as well as during Kiddush and lead some Q&A there. We're really excited to go a little bit deeper. So Brucha Haba, welcome to Temple Emunah and to our community.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Shabbat Shalom. I'm going to make a confession to kick it off. I have not been to Shabbat morning services in a while. I've been to numerous Kabbalat Shabbats, but it's very nice to be at a Torah service for a change. So thank you for having me and getting me to shul, even if shul is my office. But it's very lovely to be with you all this morning. I'm going to just start by saying that for me, this work is political, but it's personal. So just to situate myself in this conversation, I'm from Toronto. I grew up here. My mother is from Toronto. My grandmother is from Toronto. My grandfather's from Montreal, but we are sort of a many generation sort of Canadian Jewish family on that side. My father's side, on the other hand, emigrated from the Bahamas into the United States in the, I want to say early 50s. It might have been 49, but somewhere around there. And my father was born in Brooklyn, but raised as a Black child into youth into early adulthood on Staten Island in New York. Staten Island comes with its challenges for its Black population. And so for me, growing up very much in the shadow of hearing the stories of race and racism in America is very personal. Growing up with the legacies of that is very personal. And of course, having lived through Eric Garner's murder on Staten Island, on a corner that is walking distance from where my aunt lives and where I stay when I'm in New York, really, I was always sort of engaged in this. I was always, everyone in my family works in racial justice. That's just like what my family does. I jokingly say I just went into the family business in the Jewish community. But it became even more pressing and personal to me when I saw the video of Eric Garner in a place that I knew and with a police force I had heard stories of. And when I say stories, I mean the stories of when my father was falsely arrested twice as a teenage boy on Staten Island. So that's just to situate myself in this conversation. And for me, one of the big things that has come up as the Jewish community has really sort of engaged in this racial reckoning since George Floyd's murder is a feeling of relief. I've been trying to have this conversation in the Jewish communities that I walk in. I began working in the Jewish community in 2009. So 12 years, I've been trying to have this conversation in various ways. And a feeling of anxiety. Are we going to keep having this conversation? And one of the reasons that I think I really feel this way is that for a long time, the Jewish community has seen this as a conversation about justice and about doing right by other people we live among. I'm not quite sure that the Jewish community has yet come to a point where we say, actually, this is about people in our community as well. And it dawned on me when my editor kept asking me to write about George Floyd, and I was literally speechless. I had nothing to say, which if you know me in real life, and I'm sure you'll get to know through my talk today, that is not a thing that is really something that ever happens to me. But I just could not come up with any comment on it. I just felt just drastically overwhelmed. And as I went through trying to process why I was so overwhelmed by this, I realized that it actually tied back to a week earlier, where there was an article published in E-Jewish Philanthropy, which is like the trade blog of Jewish professionals, and then also in the forward, that was an excerpt from the American Jewish Yearbook. And what it was trying to do was sort of say, okay, we had these studies that said that there are X number of Jews of color in America, and now we have this other study that is saying that we missed something and there's actually more. So let's talk about how many there are. Now, I always preface this by saying I'm not a statistician. The numbers might be right on either end of the spectrum, and we're talking about 5% up to 20% is sort of the range we're looking at. But for me, the issue was that at a moment when Jews of color had finally achieved a measure of visibility, the conversation had sort of finally awoken to our existence, there was sort of a pushback from the institutions that had systematically missed our existence. And that still is happening. And so this is the tension for me, is that on the one hand, we as a Jewish people, I think, are showing up left, right, and center for racial justice in America. And that is so encouraging and so fulfilling and rewarding to be part of that. My congregation is Reformed, so I was at the URJ Biennial last year, where a motion on doing investigations into reparations actually came to the floor and was passed. And for me, I was on the floor, 6,000 Jews in this like conference hall or in this convention center hall. And I cried because it was just such a profound moment. And again, I'm going to situate myself in this. My family's Caribbean. Reparations, if my family were ever eligible for them, would be through the British. Like, it's a whole other thing, but a similarly complicated legacy, right? Like, the slaves were freed. The British government gave money to the slave owners and not the slaves. And, the biggest difference, though, is that the way that the Caribbean evolved is just a very different picture. So this isn't personal to me and that like there's some stake in it for me personally that I'll receive reparations, but just recognizing that sort of level of thinking about the roots of systemic injustice in the United States was happening in a community that I belong to. At the same time, at the biennial, and this has been written about, I'm not sharing tales out of school, There were numerous occasions where Jews of color reported at the best end of this picture, microaggressions, at the worst end of the picture, feeling completely erased and ignored, including a speaker who was told that she wasn't able to pick up her credentials because the person who was speaking was only the person whose name was on the tag was able to come and pick up the credentials. So this is the moment we're at, and I'm trying to sort of hold all of these things in. I've been doing a lot of reading because one of the privileges of being somebody who talks about this is that this week I get to teach a lot, and I'm actually doing some text study tomorrow. At a congregation in New Jersey, and reading through sort of historic primary sources from the civil rights movement. And I came across this really profound line from Abraham Joshua Heschel that was delivered actually at the conference where he ended up meeting and beginning his relationship with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I just want to read it to you because I think I want to use it to sort of frame the rest of what I'm going to talk about here. So he says, to some Americans, the situation of the Negro, for all its stains and spots, seems fair and trim. So many revolutionary changes have taken place in the field of civil rights. So many deeds of charity are being done. So much decency radiates day and night. Our standards are modest, our sense of injustice tolerable and timid, our moral indignation impermanent. Yet human violence is interminable, unbearable, permanent. The conscience builds its confines, is subject to fatigue, longs for comfort. Yet those who are hurt, and he, capital H, he, who inhabits eternity, neither slumbers nor sleep. And then he goes on to talk about the courts and how many of us are like, justice will take its course, if something bad happens, it'll go through the court system, etc. And he writes, righteousness must dwell not only in the places where justice is judicially administered. There are many ways of evading the law and escaping the arm of justice. Only a few acts of violence are even brought to the attention of the courts. As a rule, those who know how to exploit are endowed with the skill to justify their acts, while those who are easily exploited possess no skill in pleading their own cause. Those who neither exploit nor are exploited are ready to fight when their own interests are harmed. They will not be involved when not personally affected. Who shall plead for the helpless? Who shall prevent the epidemic of injustice that no court of justice is capable of stopping? And then he goes on to talk about the role of the prophet, and it's a really brilliant piece. It's quite easy to find. I'll make sure to send a link so it can go out to you all. It wasn't what I was intending to talk about today, and I was reading over it last night and thought, ooh, this is good stuff. Now, what I was intending to bring today was some words of wisdom from James Baldwin, who is, in my mind, a prophet, bar none, in American sort of society and discourse on race and justice. And what came to me through that is how Baldwin really tries to tackle the issue of anti-Semitism within the Black community. And what he really tries to tackle is the idea that there is sort of some unique Black anti-Semitism, and he goes on a whole sort of root cause thing, and ultimately he says, well, yes, the title of the piece is Negroes are anti-Semitic because they are anti-white. It's a really beautiful piece to reckon with. Essentially what he says is that Jews get stuck in the position of middleman that Christianity has always given to us, and therefore we become the face. He uses a word like we do the dirty deeds or the dirty laundry or something like that, of sort of the hegemony in which we live. And he uses examples in Harlem of the landlord, the shopkeeper, et cetera, et cetera. But what was really profound to me when I was reading this is he also, though, puts Jews on notice here. And he says, where did it just go? Sorry, I've got too many things, too many underlines in this document, and I just lost my quote. Here we go. He says, "It is true that many Jews use shamelessly the slaughter of the 6 million by the Third Reich as proof that they cannot be bigots, or in the hope of not being held responsible for their bigotry. It's galling to be told by a Jew whom you know to be exploiting you that he cannot possibly be doing what you know he is doing because he is a Jew. It is bitter to watch the Jewish storekeeper locking up his store for the night and going home, going with your money in his pocket to a clean neighborhood miles from you, which you will not be allowed to enter." I've read this piece like 10,000 times at this point, probably. That probably isn't even much of an exaggeration. I come back to it very regularly and have over the years. And one of the things that I find so profound is when you read that and Heschel side by side, essentially what it's saying is, Jews, wake up. Anti-Semitism is real. We all face it. At the same time, we have to recognize that we have now been afforded a certain level of privileges in America. And what that means, anti-Semitism will continue to be real, and actually it'll continue to come from places like the Black community. But we have a position of privilege that we can use to do social justice work. And the only way out of anti-Semitism is to address the root causes of injustice for everyone. Now, this brings me back to Jews of color. And then I'll wrap up and we'll be able to talk a whole lot more about this because really I could talk about this sort of thing I literally taught a 6-week, 2-hour a night course on this just in the fall. Bringing it back to Jews of color, we occupy this space between these two worlds, and the issues that divide the Black community and the Jewish people. And when I say the Jewish people, I mean our organized communities and our institutions that predominantly do not look like us. And I always feel funny saying do not look like us because I see myself. But I also know internally how much I look like my father's family and know that it's an accident of genetics that my skin came out white. My brother is darker than I am and looks exactly like my mother's family. Go figure. But we don't often see people who look like us. And we have to live in this tension between our two communities, whether we're mixed race individuals or whether, like myself, or whether we are, fully Black people who happen to be Jewish for one, either by birth or by conversion or by marriage, or whatever sort of route into the Jewish community we've taken. And for me, what I always struggle with and sort of try to light a fire under us for is to really reckon and with that tension between wanting to protect ourselves from the ongoing threats of anti-Semitism, even that sometimes come from the people that we want to show up for, and wanting to be there for the people inside our community who are facing also racism, who also experience some of that tension with that privilege disparity between for lack of a better way of putting it, white Jews, white presenting Jews, whatever language we want to use, on the one hand, and Black people in general on the other, and our desire to pursue justice. And so this year, this all feels, I think, even more urgent. Of course, George Floyd's murder, but of course, also, what we saw last week, which is hard to believe that was only a week ago. Every week feels like a year. But what we saw last week with people storming the Capitol wearing Holocaust denial shirts. What we saw in Charlottesville, when they chanted, "The Jews will not replace us," they didn't mean that Jews are going to replace white people. They meant that Jews are going to flood America with moral degenerate minorities in order to undermine the quality of America. That's what that replacement theory is. So all of that is to say, at the end of the day, whatever privilege we are afforded, suburban lifestyles, whatever it might be. Both Heschel and Baldwin talk a lot about the comfort of suburban lifestyles. Whatever privilege we've been afforded is not actually safety. And our safety is tied up and bound to racial justice. And racial justice, of course, is for justice, and it's also for Jews of color. I'm just going to end with one short, sort of making it really personal. I started with the feeling of anxiety and excitement, and that's where I want to end as well. One of the things that has actually bolstered me through this really difficult year, and we're all in this extremely difficult year together. One of the things that has really bolstered me was watching my community wake up to what we've been trying to say about Black Lives Matter and racial justice in the United States. In the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's murder, I was getting phone calls from people I hadn't heard from in ages. Somebody sent me dinner, just all of these like really caring things that said, hey, like this is already a really hard time we're going through. And then this happened and we see you and we see how hard this is. That has honestly been the fuel that has enabled me to keep teaching, to keep talking, and to keep going. And so when my Jewish community stands up and says, I see you, I see what you've been trying to say, I see what you've been telling us, there is no underestimating the emotional impact that has had on me. And so what I really want to leave you with today is by being here, you're showing up. By being here, you're standing up. And keep doing it. Because what I've seen from my community over the last, I guess it's really only 7 months since George Floyd's murder, but it feels already like a lifetime. What I've seen from my community is a true change that says to me, we care. And I'm grateful. I really look forward to continuing the conversation with anyone who stays during Kiddush, and want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom and Yasher Koach. Toda Rabba. Tema, thank you so much for sharing so beautifully and powerfully and movingly, especially bringing us in those texts from Heschel and from Baldwin, really opening up some light for us to have that conversation. Many of us gathered on Wednesday night after watching a movie, Race and Illusion, and saw the amazingly devastating bigotry that has been embedded in the United States towards obviously Blacks, but as well to Latino population, to the Asian community that was in Supreme Court cases of a century ago. And we discussed that. And now we'll continue the conversation at Kiddush. So I reiterate your invitation to continue the conversation at Kiddush. And we're also invited on Monday morning on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The town of Lexington is organizing a community-wide, and you don't have to live in Lexington, community conversation on race from 10 to noon. I'll be there, and I hope many others can join us as we continue this work. And we'll be having a workshop led by Debbie Irving, who obviously has written extensively about this. That will be on Sunday, January 31st, from 3 to 5 p.m. You do need to register in advance, and that will be a really important afternoon to really deepen our work. And I hope many of you can register and join us for that.